Alright, what's up guys? My name is Zach and today I am driving a 1987 Cadillac Cimarron. Up front is a 2.8 liter V6 and down below is a 3-speed automatic transmission. Now I am super excited to be driving this here Cimarron for the obvious reason of the fact that you don't see these anymore. This is a J-body GM, which are rare in itself, but the Cimarron, the Cadillac version of the J-body, is even more rare. So I'm excited to dig into that with you guys today. But before we get on to anything else, I have a website, zackpradel.com, where you can check out stickers like this retro sticker pack I have available. Would fit very well with this here Cimarron. You could also submit your own vehicle to be reviewed by me through a quick and easy submission form, and you could read my behind the scenes blog to see what I'm filming before it comes out on the channel. But let's get back to that 2.8 liter V6 under the hood. Well, it made about 124 horsepower back when it was new in 1987. It is fuel injected, which is a big factor. The very first year Cimarron, 1981, was actually a carbureted 4-cylinder. So this is quite the upgrade over that. From what the owner Aaron has told me, the 2.8 liter is a very, very reliable engine. Of course, it's going to have its 80s cars issues like wiring, and he did swap for slightly bigger fuel injectors from a Ford, but once you sort that out, these are pretty dang reliable, and these were actually the predecessors to what later led to the 3100 V6s we saw in that Buick Century I reviewed so long ago. Like I said, paired to it's a 3-speed automatic transmission. It's a pretty lazy transmission from GM. It's nothing crazy. It's not like the modern automatics we have today. However, it's still working here 35 years later, so I can't really knock it too hard. Last but not least, the Cadillac Cimarron is front-wheel drive. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the interior. Well, in front of me, I have 4 main gauges. On the left is my speedometer. In the center, I get my coolant temperature and fuel. And on the right, I get my tachometer. I love the tachometer as the yellow and then red for the red line. Absolutely love that. Super 80s. And moving on to the steering wheel, I just have a little Cadillac logo and that's it. The steering wheel is pretty basic. The hand grips are actually pretty low down on the steering wheel, which gives it very much a cruiser kind of feel. This isn't a sporty car. This is for cruising. This is for luxury. And that's pretty neat. Off to the left, down below the gauges, I do have my headlight switches and my mirrors, and my hood latch is actually up in sight. Most cars hide this under the dash, but Cadillac said, nope, here it is. Moving on to the door up at the top, I do have my power locks, which is very nice. But then I also have the window switches. The window switches are unlabeled and they go in a strange pattern. All the way off to the left is the driver's side front, then it goes passenger front, then driver's side rear, then passenger rear. Very interesting setup from Cadillac there. Moving into the center, I do have a single climate control vent and the radio. I absolutely love the radio because it says Symphony Sound. Super cool to see this style radio and the original radio in cars like this. Most 80s cars have their radios torn out and thrown away, but not this here Cimarron, and I thank Aaron for that. Down below that, I do have climate controls. This does come with AC from the factory. Fantastic. And what's cool is I get these LED lights that light up as I turn on the fan speed, things like that. It was sort of this cool futuristic look for the Cadillac's climate controls, but this is back in the 80s. Off to the left, I do have a rear defroster switch. And down below, I have a cubby, an ashtray, and the shifter itself. The shifter is unapologetically GM from this era, no two ways about it. But then I have these built-in coin holders, very interesting there, again, very 90s and 80s. The handbrake and the center console. And of course, because this is an 80s car, it does not have cup holders, so it fails the big friggin' bottle test. Now moving on to the seats are nice and comfortable. They say Cimarron stitched into them, and they're exactly what I would expect out of a Cadillac from this era. They're big, cushy, and comfortable, and honestly, one of the best parts of the Cimarron. Speaking of which, however, we do have back seats, so let's go do a backseat review. All right, so we're in the back of the 1987 Cadillac Cimarron, and this is where it really doesn't feel like a Cadillac. The seats themselves, very cushy, very soft, very comfortable, very plush. That's not the issue. The actual seat space back here is not great. Now, this seat is moved back a little bit further than usual, so I would normally have a little bit more legroom, but still not nearly the amount of legroom that I'm accustomed to seeing in Cadillacs. This is where you really start to notice that this is a J-body, and we'll talk a lot more about that at the end of the video. However, I do have power windows back here. Of course, I have an ashtray down here and a tiny little armrest down below. Let's hop out and talk about the trunk and cargo space, and then we'll talk about the looks. All right, so we're on the back of the Cimarron. A couple of things to note back here. First of all, to get to the trunk release, it's super cool. You actually slide the Cadillac logo off to the left, which is pretty typical of the era. Second of all, I have two keys. The round one is for the trunk, the square one for the ignition. But once we are back here, this is a very Cadillac trunk. It is very large, comparatively to the size of the vehicle, to be fair. However, I don't get anything crazy back here. I have this nice Cadillac floor mat, which is great. And I do get this material. This is a very GM material to me. I'm not quite sure what it is. My 07 Pontiac G6 had a similar material in the trunk. This just screams GM to me. But other than that, very good trunk space, especially for an American sedan, but also for Cadillac. Now we gotta talk about the looks, and I love the look of the Cimarron because it just has that sort of home feeling 80s boxiness to it. I absolutely love the look of it. I mean, how can you not? I know I didn't grow up in the 80s, but this just feels like my childhood to me, which is just fantastic. I love it. However, this gets into my final thoughts because this is where you start to notice that, well, this isn't fully a Cadillac. It is, but it isn't. So why was the Cadillac Cimarron one of the most hated and biggest flops of Cadillac's lineage? Well, to understand that car, you have to understand this car. This is a 1986 Chevy Cavalier. And if you look at it for more than a second and a half, you'll notice that it looks eerily similar to the Cimarron. Chevy being a lower tier brand, Cadillac being the top tier brand for GM. Why do they look so similar? Well, underneath, they are the same car. Now, this has the bigger engine, the 2.8, but this was a rebadged Chevy Cavalier. And so in the 1980s, when people wanted a Cadillac, they wanted the big V8. They wanted the floaty suspension, like the early 90s Fleetwoods that I've driven here on the channel. But then Cadillac gave them this, a front-wheel drive V6 rebadged version of the Cavalier. Journalists were pissed because it seemed like GM put almost no effort into it at all. Sure, they made custom Cimarron badges, and yeah, they changed the nose a little bit and taillights a little bit, but people felt as though GM took Chevy's homework, scratched out the name, and put their own. And so because of that, people felt duped. They felt lied to. And nothing turns a customer away than when they think they're getting got. And that's what happened with the Cimarron. Is this a bad car? No, not in the slightest. I'm loving this experience driving this Cimarron. I am. It's fantastic. It's comfortable. It has decent tech and features for the late 1980s. It's a hoot and a half. Interestingly, after I got out of the Cimarron, I was also given the opportunity to drive this 1986 Chevy Cavalier you see on screen, and unfortunately I won't be doing a full review of this car, but there are some very noticeable differences. First of all, that only had a 2-liter engine, which is very gutless. It makes horsepower in the double digits. The Cavalier felt a lot thinner, but actually it had a floatier ride. This is because the Cimarron comes with a factory rear sway bar, but the Cavalier does not have a factory rear sway bar. One last thing to note about the Cavaliers and Cimarrons from this era is the fact that it matters where these cars were built. Now, there is a plant in Janesville, Wisconsin, as well as there was a plant in Ohio. The Janesville cars are actually better made with thicker steel, American-made steel, where the vehicles that came from Ohio actually used imported steel from Asia, so they were a lot thinner. thinner and constructed ever so slightly different. Now, luckily, the Cavalier you see on screen was a Janesville vehicle, so it was built with thicker steel, as well as all Cimarrons were built in the Wisconsin plant, but some Cavaliers came from Ohio with the thinner metal, and some came from Wisconsin with the thicker metal. The Cadillac Cimarron is a rebadged Cavalier, and while that might have been the last nail in the coffin back in the 1980s, here, almost 40 years later, I have to say, I'm happy with it. This is a cool little car, and I love it. I really do. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to Aaron for letting me take out his 1987 Cadillac Cimarron. I mean, how many of these are left? I don't know. It can't be many, especially in this condition, 55,000 miles. I mean, what an absolute treat. Aaron is awesome. He also makes some of his own videos about the Cadillac Cimarron, so it'll be linked down in the description below. I highly recommend checking them out. He is so knowledgeable about these cars. If you have any questions, please reach out to him in his comments or something like that. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.